All right, so most of us, we think we know the Christmas story pretty well. But what if some of the most familiar parts, like Santa Claus, even the date itself, are actually way more modern than the story they're supposed to be telling? Today, we're going to dive into this really fascinating retelling from 1963 that kind of flips everything we thought we knew on its head. So let's just start with a question that gets right to the heart of this whole thing. What if the Christmas story that you and I know, with all its traditions, isn't really the original story at all? Well, our guide for this little exploration is actually a sermon from 1963. And it takes a hard look at the Christmas narrative and it questions a ton of the traditions we just take for granted. So let's jump into its first big challenge, the whole commercial side of the holiday. Yeah, so the first big point this sermon makes is this call to reclaim the story from everything it's become today. And listen, the author does not pull any punches here. This quote gets right to the core of the critique. The argument is that these secular figures have totally overshadowed the original spiritual meaning of the whole thing. And this really lays out the central conflict, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got the whole commercial rush, the gifts, the stress. And on the other, the sermon is arguing for a return to what it calls the spiritual truth, which is the birth of Jesus Christ. The author's whole point is that these two things have basically become enemies. But okay, the sermon doesn't just stop with modern traditions. It goes after something even more fundamental, the date itself. It makes this pretty bold claim that Jesus wasn't actually born in December at all. So here's the side-by-side. Tradition obviously says December 25th, but this source argues that a spring birth, probably sometime in April or May, is way more likely when you look at the scriptural and, while just the natural evidence. And the reasoning behind this claim is pretty fascinating. For one, the sermon points out that shepherds just wouldn't be out on the hills in the middle of a freezing Judean winter. And then there's this other layer. It connects Jesus' title, the Lamb of God, to the cycles of nature, arguing that, just like actual lambs, he would have been born in the spring. Okay, so if he wasn't born in December, how in the world did we get December 25th? Well, the sermon points to this idea of syncretism. The argument goes that as Christianity was spreading through the Roman Empire, the date was picked to line up with a huge Roman pagan festival for the sun god's birthday. It was basically a way to blend the two traditions to make the new faith a little easier to swallow. And this idea that tradition got layered on top of the original story, it just keeps going when the sermon starts talking about the wise men, the magi. So this clears up two huge misconceptions, at least according to this source. Tradition always says there were three wise men, right? And that they showed up at the manger. Well, the sermon argues, first, the text never actually gives a number. And second, their journey took 2 years, meaning they got there long after Jesus was a newborn. And their journey is laid out like this incredible story. First, they see a supernatural sign in the sky, a star. They follow it for 2 whole years. They end up in Jerusalem, and they go to the top religious authorities looking for answers. And those guys have no idea what they're talking about. But here's the kicker. It was only after they left the city, after they walked away from those established institutions, that the star, their supernatural guide, popped back up. And this quote right here, it just perfectly sums up the sermon's whole take on the Magi. They succeeded because they were following a direct heavenly God-given sign, not because they were listening to some man's theology. Now, this theme of personal revelation, it keeps going as we shift gears and look at the really personal story of Joseph. And the sermon really puts you in Joseph's shoes here. I mean, think about it. He's described as a good, just man, and he's suddenly facing this unbelievable story from his fiancée, a story that the author calls completely fantastic. And you can just feel how tough this was. He's engaged to Mary, he finds out she's pregnant, and her explanation, it's something nobody could possibly wrap their head around. He's a good guy. He wants to do the right thing, so he's thinking about breaking off the engagement privately, to save her from public shame. And right when he's struggling with this, boom, he gets his own personal sign. An angel comes to him in a dream and delivers this message, telling him not to be afraid and confirming that Mary's unbelievable, unusual story is actually true. And just like that, everything changed. According to this source, the second Joseph got that direct, personal revelation, all the questions, all the doubts, they were just gone. The mystery was solved. And it wasn't solved by human logic or by asking for advice.
It was solved by a divine sign that was meant only for him.
Okay, so the date, the Magi, Joseph's dream, what's the common thread here? What does it all add up to? Let's get to the sermon's central message.
This is where the core argument gets crystal clear. You see the parallel, right? The Magi follow a star. Joseph trusts a dream. In both stories, the key to finding the truth was following a personal, supernatural guide, and it had nothing to do with the formal religious authorities of their time. And this quote just captures the bigger picture so well. The sermon is basically using the Christmas story to say, hey, the trouble with us today is that we get so stuck in our routines, in the usual things, that we completely miss it when something unusual, something divinely inspired is happening right under our noses.
So in the end, this retelling from 1963 does more than just tear apart a holiday. It leaves all of us with a really provocative challenge. By stripping away all that tradition, it's asking us to think about what it might mean to look for a personal, heavenly sign in our own lives. In a world that's so full of routines and rules, the sermon's question is as relevant as ever. Are we open to the unusual?